My father's voice split the air like breaking glass. You and your kid are dead weight leeches sucking this family dry. My mother just smiled, satisfied, while they sat in the house I paid for eating dinner I cooked. For years I'd been their safety net, their silent wallet, their backup plan. But that night something inside me finally stopped bending. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked my father in the eye and said, "You have 24 hours to leave." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. That was the night I realized blood can drown you faster than any stranger ever could. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me and listening. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes knowing someone out there is listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Darrow Kestrel, and what I'm about to share isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about breaking free from the people who taught me to stay silent. If you believe family should mean safety, not survival, please hit subscribe. Every story here is a voice reclaiming its worth one truth at a time. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken, but the air was thick enough to choke on. The golden light above the table didn't make it warmer. It only made every silence sharper. My parents sat across from me in the brownstone I'd bought with my own money and the life I had built without their help, and yet they looked around as if they still owned it. I placed the last fork on the table, sliding a yellow sticky note beneath my plate. 4 rules were scribbled in black ink. No insults about Evo, no cash, paperwork required. I can end the dinner at any time. Those were the boundaries they had taught me to never have. Harlan. My father didn't wait for the food to cool before his voice split through the air. You and that kid of yours are dead weight. Leeches, both of you sucking this family dry. My mother Lydia smiled the way she always did when she wanted to look innocent. Her approval small, but deadly. My brother Zeph leaned back in his chair, chewing slow like he was watching a play he'd already seen the ending to. I stared at the roasted chicken between us and said evenly, "This dinner isn't about blame. It's about seeing the paperwork. If you don't have it, we're done here." My father slammed his hand against the table, the plates rattling. "You make $350 grand a year, Darrow. How can you sit there and watch your family drown?" The number landed like a slap. I hadn't told them my salary. They'd been tracking me somehow through Zeph, probably. My mother jumped in with her softest tone, a tone that used to make me give in. "Sweetheart, we're family. Don't make your father upset. It's your duty to help." Duty. That word again. A word that sounded like love, but meant debt. From the ceiling above, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, my son Evo, 12 years old, listening. I pictured him crouched beside his bed, clutching his sketchbook of rockets, hearing his grandfather call him a leech. My pulse steadied. "No one in this house," I said slowly, "will use my son as a tool to guilt me." Zeph muttered, always so dramatic. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping the floor. I looked at each of them, the father who'd never said he was proud, the mother who weaponized tears, the brother who called failure a vision. "You have 24 hours to leave my house." My voice was calm, no shouting, no begging, just final. For a second, no one breathed. My father's face turned the color of raw brick. My mother's smile flickered. Zeph's smirk vanished. When I turned away, I caught my own reflection in the dark window, shoulders straight, jaw tight, the same face that once flinched whenever he raised his voice. Not tonight. Upstairs, a door clicked shut. The sound anchored me. I'd done what needed to be done. Later, after they'd stormed out and the echo of the front door died, I stood alone in the kitchen. The sticky note under my plate glowed faintly from the light above. I peeled it up, folded it, and slipped it into my pocket. The clock ticked once, twice, then again. I whispered to no one. This time, I'm not paying their price. The next evening, as the city started to blur into lights across the Manhattan Bridge, my office at Dumbo was nearly empty. I was shutting my laptop when my phone buzzed. Lydia's name flashed across the screen. I almost let it ring out. Calls from my mother never came without cost. But something in me, that small part still hoping she might just say, "hello," made me answer. Her voice trembled perfectly. Darrow. Your father's heart. The doctors say if we don't act fast, he might not make it. And the house, it's bad, honey. We're $300,000 behind. The bank's threatening foreclosure. I pressed my palm to the cold glass window. Below Brooklyn glowed like a promise I'd built myself. Bring the hospital bills, I said quietly. The letters from the bank. Tomorrow night, dinner at my place. She hesitated, caught off guard. Can't we just... No, I cut in. Face to face. After I hung up, the silence in my office buzzed like static. I'd been here before, same words, different crisis. Somehow, the emergencies never ended until I said yes. I walked to the cafe on Smith Street, where Rowan Pike, my best friend from Cornell, was waiting. He spun his coffee cup between his palms like a coin toss. You shouldn't have picked up, he said when I told him. And if they don't show proof that's not help they need, it's another performance. He leaned forward. New York's a one-party consent state. Record the dinner. Keep everything. Build a file. Screenshots, old transfers, timestamps. Call it your case folder. I smiled without humor. A file on my own family. Rowan's eyes softened. You're not collecting dirt. You're collecting truth. By the time I left the cafe, the streetlights had come on. I stopped at an electronics store and bought a pocket recorder small enough to hide inside the lockbox above my kitchen counter. The clerk asked if it was for interviews. Something like that, I said. When I got home, Ivo was on the living room floor piecing together a model rocket. His fingers were smudged with paint. Tomorrow's a grown-up night, I told him gently. You'll stay over at Nate's. Okay. He didn't look up. Is Grandpa still mad? I hesitated. He just doesn't understand things the way we do. Ivo nodded, quiet. Can I take my telescope, of course? After he went upstairs, I stood by the fridge and pulled out a fresh sticky note. I wrote one line and pressed it to the door. Don't bleed for people who get used to watching you bleed. The next morning on my way to work, I opened the mailbox by the stoop. Inside was an envelope from a mortgage company I didn't recognize. Refinance options for your property at 218 Oak Ridge Lane, Yonkers. My parents' address. My stomach tightened. Maybe they really were drowning, or maybe they'd already dragged me into it without me knowing. That night as I walked home through Carroll Gardens, the neighborhood was quiet, the brownstones glowing soft and gold. My house stood still waiting. Inside the recorder sat hidden in the lockbox, a silent witness for tomorrow. I looked up at Ivo's window. His model rocket gleamed faintly under the lamp. For years I'd told myself that helping my parents was the same as loving them. But love isn't supposed to feel like drowning. Tomorrow I'd find out if they ever planned to stop pulling me under. The table gleamed like an interrogation room, oak polished to a mirror, plates lined up with military precision. I had turned the overhead light cooler, not the warm gold of comfort, but the sharp white that makes people squint. The lockbox above the counter was already open just enough for the tiny red dot inside to blink. Recording. Lydia arrived first, smiling too sweetly, arms full of reheated casserole she hadn't cooked herself. I thought I'd bring something homey, she said, setting the dish down like peace offerings ever meant anything in this family. Harlan followed, grunting his usual hello. That wasn't one. Zeph came last, balancing his laptop. I've got something to show you, he said. AR meets VR, it's gonna blow your mind. I didn't sit yet. The documents, I said. Bank letters, hospital forms, anything from the insurance company. Lydia's smile twitched. Honey, you have to trust your mother. You think I'd lie about your father's heart? She looked at Harlan, who thumped the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. He's our son, he said. He makes more in a year than we ever did in 10. Helping your family is your duty, Darrow. Zeph clicked his laptop open screen, glowing blue. I'm just saying if he backed me up this one time, I could pull us all out. It's about vision. You work in tech. You get it. I sat down slowly, voice even. No paperwork, no money. That's the rule. My mother's eyes narrowed, the warmth leaking out. You're really going to let your father die over some papers? I'm asking for honesty, I said. Harlan scoffed. You've lost respect. You act like a stranger. Upstairs, faint footsteps crossed the ceiling, light uncertain. Ivo was awake, listening again. Zeph leaned forward, words spilling faster than his brain could catch them. Fine. The debt's mostly mine, okay? They co-signed for me. That's why the house is tied up. He froze halfway through the sentence, realizing what he'd just done. The air went still. My mother's eyes cut toward him sharp and panicked. Zeph, she hissed, but it was too late. I leaned back, studying the three of them. So it's not about heart surgery, it's about your company again. Lydia's voice dropped to a hiss. Watch your tone. You think people won't believe us if we tell them how you've treated your family? I'll post the truth online if I have to. Everyone will know what kind of ungrateful son you are. Maybe they'll want to hear about that little boy you're raising all alone. For a moment, I said nothing. The refrigerator hummed. The light flickered over the wine glass in her hand. I looked up to the ceiling again, silent above us. Ivo deserved better than this echo of shame handed down like inheritance. I stood. You have 24 hours to leave my house. Harlan's mouth opened, but no sound came. Lydia looked ready to cry, then decided not to waste the effort. Zeph shut his laptop with a snap. I walked them to the door, no shouting, no explanations. When the latch clicked behind them, I exhaled, the quiet roaring in my ears. I walked back to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and switched off the recorder. The tiny red light disappeared. Now I said softly, "Let the truth speak for itself." It started before sunrise. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the nightstand, notifications, hundreds of them. Lydia's face filled my feed, crying into her front camera under the caption, "Abandoned by our son." She sat in her rented penthouse, perfectly lit, holding a photo of my house behind her. Her voice shook in practiced rhythm. He threw us out, his own parents, and his poor child. What kind of example is that? The video had already hit 50,000 views when I reached the kitchen. By noon, it crossed 200. By evening, co-workers were whispering behind screens, pretending not to stare. Comments piled up like a storm surge. Ungrateful. That boy deserves better. Rich people forget their roots. I scrolled until the words blurred. Somewhere between disgust and disbelief, I opened the case folder on my laptop. Subfolders blinked in neat rows. Social, finance, legal, medical, cloud access. I started capturing everything: screenshots, URLs, timestamps, metadata. I downloaded the video, backed it up on 2 external drives, uploaded a copy offline. If they wanted a war, I'd fight it with evidence. Rowan met me that evening at our booth on Smith Street. The cafe lights were low, the smell of espresso cutting through my nausea. "They're escalating," he said, flipping open his tablet. "I've already sent a preservation request to TikTok's legal department. You'll want to track any cross-platform reposts before they delete or alter them." "Too late for privacy," I said. "She already mentioned Ivo." Rowan frowned. "Then you go full counterproof. Pull your transfer history. Show that every loan was your money, not theirs. Build your own narrative before they bury you in theirs." That night, I stayed at my desk long after the city went to sleep. I printed bank statements, highlighted the years I'd covered their mortgage payments, utility bills, Zeph's startup fees. A pattern emerged: monthly withdrawals labeled family expense that never returned. I saved every line. Around midnight, an anonymous email hit my inbox. No subject line, just an attachment, a scanned lease for a penthouse in Midtown under my parents' names, dated 2 weeks earlier. So much for being homeless. I stared at the signature, Harlan's bold, careless scrawl, and something in me hardened. Minutes later, I checked the video analytics again. One anonymous commenter had posted a long paragraph defending my mother. At the end, they cited my exact salary down to the decimal. Only 3 people on Earth knew that number: me, HR, and my father. I finally understood how they'd always known too much. I switched to the cloud drive Zeph had set up years ago for family photos. The folder still existed, syncing automatically with my phone. The same photo Lydia used in her video, me and Ivo in front of the brownstone, was sitting there. Metadata showed it had been accessed 3 days ago from an IP address in Yonkers. I stared at the timestamp until the edges of my vision blurred. They hadn't just twisted the story, they'd reached inside my life, stolen the images that built it. The next morning, an email from Evo's teacher popped up. He's been quiet this week. Some of the kids saw things online. Just thought you should know. I sat there a long time before replying. Thank you. I'll handle it. By afternoon, I'd organized the entire digital record. Screenshots sorted by date. Every transaction labeled. Every comment logged. When Rowan dropped by to check in, I handed him a flash drive. Everything's on there, I said. Every lie they've told, every post, every number. He nodded, sliding it into his briefcase. You've done the hard part now. Let the paper do the talking. After he left, I stood by the window watching Brooklyn fall into its usual rhythm of lights and noise. Evo came home later than usual, backpack slung low. Some kid said Grandma's famous now, he muttered. They asked if we really kicked her out. I crouched to meet his eyes. People online don't always tell the truth. What matters is what we know happened here. He looked unconvinced but nodded. Upstairs, I heard him close his door, the quiet click, a sound I'd grown to fear more than shouting. I turned back to my desk phone in hand and called a number I hadn't dialed before that night. It rang twice before a woman's calm voice answered. Sable Huang, she said. My name's Darrow Kestrel, I told her. If there's a legal way to close a door that's been left open too long, I want to know it. The line was silent for a moment. Then she replied, Then let's start building your case. I ended the call and looked at the city beyond the window, its reflection flickering across the glass. They wanted a public spectacle. I'd give them something better, a paper trail they couldn't delete. Sable Huang's office looked like it was carved out of ice and logic. The walls were glass, the floor polished gray, and the city below pulsed in reflections across her desk. Files were stacked like miniature skylines, paper towers built on people's mistakes. I slid my case folder across to her and watched her eyes move with surgical precision. She flipped through bank statements, mortgage contracts, refinance letters until one page made her pause. Here, she said, tapping the corner with her pen. They refinanced in 2022. Clause 17. In the event of delinquency exceeding 90 days, the lender reserves the right to sell to any qualified buyer without prior consent. She looked up. If the account is in default, you can buy the house legally. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not out of shock, but because the idea carried too much weight. That house was a scar stitched into my life. Birthdays turned silent. Dinners turned wars. My childhood turned into collateral. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. Sable leaned back, eyes steady. If you proceed, they can't challenge you in court. The law's clean on this, but you'll need to brace yourself. Publicly, this will look brutal. Buying your parents' home out from under them isn't a headline people forgive easily. I stared at the contract, my father's and mother's signatures printed in neat cursive under the bank seal. They hadn't missed 1 or 2 payments, they'd missed 3 months straight. 90 days delinquent. I wasn't watching them drown anymore. They'd already let go of the rope. That night, rain slicked the Brooklyn Bridge. I parked on the shoulder for a moment, windshield wipers whispering over the glass radio, murmuring a talk show about family obligations. I thought of all the times those words had been used like chains. I called Rowan. Can you check something for me? Always, he said. I think they've been inside my cloud drive again. He didn't even sound surprised. Send me the log file. 20 minutes later, his voice came back over the speaker. One of the logins came from Yonkers 2 nights ago. IP traces to a local provider registered to your parents' address. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. They're still in it. After all this. They're not just desperate, Rowan said quietly. They're trying to keep control. The thought was colder than anger. Control, that was the real inheritance in my family. Guilt, and control. By the time I got home, the city had gone to sleep, but I hadn't. I opened my laptop, signed into the bank's portal, and filled out the paperwork. My cursor hovered over the submit button. Buyer Darrow Kestrel. I clicked. A confirmation email came through seconds later. Application received. Short sale process initiated. Then another notification followed. Current co-owner on file, Zeph Kestrel. They'd already shifted part of the property under his name. A move to dodge the bank, maybe to stall the foreclosure. But the law had a word for people like me, bona fide purchaser. The good faith buyer, protected. For once, I had the law on my side, not against me. I closed the laptop, the rain still whispering against the windows. I thought of Sable's words. They'll never expect you to fight clean. I wasn't fighting at all. I was simply signing the end of a cycle. I whispered to the dark kitchen, "This isn't revenge. This is repayment." The city outside hummed, unaware that a quiet battle line had just shifted. The war for truth was no longer about who shouted louder, it was about who held the receipts. I turned off the lights, feeling the calm that comes only after years of fear have finally expired. "I'm not punishing them," I said aloud, more to myself than to anyone. "I'm just closing a debt they never meant to pay." The house in Yonkers stood at the end of a sagging street, the kind where the paint never quite dries and the air smells like wet plaster. The bank's notice hung crooked on the door, fluttering in the wind like a white flag. I held the keys Sable had arranged through the foreclosure trustee and stepped inside with the locksmith. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and something older time itself, maybe. Every wall carried an echo. The hallway looked exactly as I remembered it, picture frames lined in perfect symmetry. Zeph's graduation photo still hung in the center, his smile bright and fake. My own was there too, cropped from a group shot, my shoulder half cut off. Sable stayed by the door, phone in hand, double-checking our authorization. "You've got 2 hours," she said. "After that, I need to file our report." I nodded and headed upstairs. The steps creaked like they remembered every fight we'd ever had. The attic door stuck for a moment before it gave way, sighing open. Boxes were stacked to the beams, each one labeled in Lydia's neat cursive, "Tax," "Receipts," "Misk," and one in fading ink, "Ephraim K." My grandfather. I dragged it into the light. Inside were old bank envelopes, yellowed papers tied with string, and a letter folded carefully in plastic. I peeled it open. "If you're reading this, Darrow, it means they've taken what was meant for you. The education fund is yours alone. No one else's dream. No one else's debt. Remember, money can be stolen, but integrity can't." My throat tightened. I found the accompanying bank statements, withdrawals from my grandfather's trust, matching the year I was supposed to start at Cornell. Another envelope contained an IOU scrawled in Zeph's handwriting, borrowed from family fund for startup capital. Beneath it, my parents' signatures as guarantors. Every myth they'd told about sacrifice and family was right there in ink, just not the version they'd sold me. I sat on the attic floor, light cutting through the cracked window dust, swirling in thin beams. The anger didn't come the way it used to. It didn't burn. It settled cold, precise, and quiet. I pulled out my phone and began photographing everything: the letter, the IOU, the bank statements, the envelope seals. Each click of the camera sounded like the closing of a door. I texted the files to Sable. She called within minutes. "This is it," she said. "This proves misuse of a restricted fund and direct misrepresentation. You don't need their word anymore. You've got documents." I ran a hand along the rough wood of the wall beside me, the grain splintered but strong. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice, slow and calm. "Don't take the anger with you, take the truth." Downstairs, the locksmith called out, asking if I needed help hauling anything else. I told him no. I looked around one last time. The wallpaper peeled near the corner, revealing older layers beneath floral patterns from decades before. Generations of cover-ups, literal and otherwise. I found one more box by accident when I kicked over a broken stool. Inside were family photos, my parents at church events, Zeph cutting a ribbon for some fake startup, Lydia smiling at some charity gala. And there, half hidden behind another frame, a picture of all 4 of us. Lydia had her arm around Zeph. Harlan's hand rested on his shoulder. I was off to the side, cropped, blurred face turned halfway out of the frame. I stared at it longer than I wanted to. That photo was the story of my life, always almost there, but never centered. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. Sable was leaning against her car, reviewing something on her tablet. She looked up. "Find what you needed." "More than that," I said. "I found proof." We drove back toward the city in silence. The highway lights streaked across the windshield reflections, fading fast like ghosts in reverse. By the time I reached Carroll Gardens, I felt lighter. Not vindicated, not victorious, just clean. The kind of clean that only truth can bring. I stored the scanned documents in the case drive, labeled the folder Ephraim Evidence, and backed it up twice. Before bed, I stood at Ivo's door. He was asleep, his telescope pointed out the window toward a sky he still believed could be trusted. I whispered, "We're safe now." Maybe I was saying it to him, maybe to myself. I sat by the window watching the city breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hunted by the past. The truth was louder than any accusation, and I no longer needed to explain it. I looked at the faint glow of my grandfather's letter on the desk and murmured, "You were right. The walls remember, but they also release." And in that stillness, with the hum of the city below, I knew the war was shifting. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what was stolen. The night didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. I closed my eyes and let that be enough. The truth had finally spoken for me. Friday at Terminal 4 felt like a courtroom with rolling suitcases. Bright white lights announcements slicing the air, strangers drifting into a loose half-circle without knowing why. Sable stood beside me, folders tucked beneath her arm, the edges crisp as a verdict. Then I saw them, Zeph first with his phone up and that practiced half-smile, Lydia behind him, hugging a travel pillow like a prop, Harlan last heavy steps, and eyes that scanned the room for angles. Darrow, Lydia sang, relief laid on thick, "I knew you'd come. Blood is blood." I didn't answer. Sable stepped forward and placed 3 white envelopes into their hands. "You've been notified," she said. "Property transfer documents, a harassment restraining order, and formal notice from the lender." Zeph tore his open, and the color left his face. "You bought our parents' house," I kept my voice low. "No. I bought back the future you mortgaged." Harlan's jaw flexed. "Don't humiliate your father in public." I pulled out my grandfather's letter and held it where they could all see the faded script. "He left these funds for my education. You used them to prop up a dream that never stood. Today they go back to what they were meant to protect." Lydia's eyes filled, then cleared as she adjusted to a different pose. "We just want to live, darling. You've become so cold." Around us, phones lifted, faces angled for sound. I met her gaze. "I'm not cold. I learned how not to burn." Sable handed documents to airport security. An officer skimmed them with professional boredom and nodded. "You'll need to move along," he told my parents, then motioned to the side. Zeph leaned close enough for me to see the sheen of sweat at his hairline. "You'll regret this. No one wins against family." "I'm not winning," I said. "I'm just done losing." He flinched. Lydia's lips trembled, but no tears came. Harlan looked at the envelope like it might explode. As security guided them toward baggage claim, a stranger near the gate whispered, "What's happening?" Another answered, "Looks like the truth." When it was over, the crowd thinned as quickly as it had formed. I sat on a metal bench, the cold biting through my coat, adrenaline leaving a hollow behind my ribs. Sable touched my shoulder once. "Paper speaks," she said. They walked away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel light. I felt empty. In that emptiness, something echoed space, and in it, a kind of freedom. The brownstone felt unfamiliar in its quiet. No calls, no new videos. The absence of noise made me suspicious. 3 days later, Lydia posted again, but the performance had changed. No tears, no trembling hands, just an anxious smile, and a careful confession that Zeph had pushed her, that he'd spun the story, that she'd let herself be dragged along. Comments split at first, then tilted. People remembered too much from the last clip. Zeph went live that night from a bare apartment, voice echoing. He ranted about betrayal and manipulation, about how I'd ruined his last chance. The viewer count shrank as he talked. Nothing sticks to a wall that refuses to hold it. I didn't answer either of them online. I handed everything to Sable, the letter, the IOU, the refinance clause, the bank statements, and let her file the story where it couldn't be deleted. In a small courtroom in Manhattan, the judge flipped through our exhibits and glanced at me. "You're not seeking monetary damages, I'm asking for the record," I said. "I need the truth to live somewhere official." He signed. Done. The deed listed my name alone. Outside, the winter light felt thin and honest. That evening, I went back to Yonkers with a cleanup crew. The house was stripped to its bones, dust, loose wire, the hollow of old furniture. In a corner of the garage behind a stack of warped paneling, I found a wooden sign from another era Kestrel carpentry, family since 1974. I brushed off the grime and carried it to the curb, then stopped. I decided to keep it not as a memorial but as a warning: if the foundation is a lie, nothing you build lasts. Lydia posted once more before disappearing, blaming Zeph in a tone that sounded like a door closing. In Discovery, Sable pulled a thread of messages where Zeph had mapped out the first viral post angles captions, which photo to pluck from the family cloud. We entered them into the file. Harlan never showed for court. His lawyer said he was unreachable, which felt like the truest thing anyone in his camp had ever said. Back home, the kitchen clock ticked like it did the night I placed the sticky note under my plate. I thought victory would feel louder. Instead, it sounded like a long exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I set the old carpentry sign against the wall and let the silence settle. Justice hadn't made me happy. It had made me honest. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. The morning broke clear and soft over Carroll Gardens. Rowan stopped by with coffee. Sable arrived with a slim stack of final papers. We signed where Tabs told me to sign. When she packed her briefcase, Sable smiled, almost surprised. "You won without needing anyone else to lose." "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I was trying to live." In the afternoon, Catherine Vale from the Atlantic Ledger sat on my porch with a small recorder. "Are you afraid to tell this publicly?" she asked. "Not anymore," I said. "I let too many people tell it for me." Her article went live a week later. My inbox filled with messages from strangers who had been called selfish for saying no, who had been turned into wallets with a heartbeat, who had been shamed for drawing a line and told it wasn't love. I read them at the kitchen table, each one a small lantern. I started sketching a plan for a support group, a quiet room once a month where people could name what happened to them and not be told to forgive it before they understood it. Maybe a small channel to share resources about boundaries and documentation, about how to keep your life yours without having to explain why. Late that day, Ivo called me into the yard. He stood by a shallow hole with a sapling in his arms. "Can we put it here?" he asked. "So I can see it from my window." We lowered the red maple into the earth-pressed soil around its young trunk, watered until the ground darkened. I told him about his great-great-grandfather planting a pecan tree in Vermont, how it took years before it offered shade. "Trees and trust need time," I said. He looked up. "When I'm older, I want to see this from the street and know it's ours." "One day you'll leave this house," I told him. "When you do, the tree will still be here to remind you freedom is something you keep." That evening, I found a new drawing on his desk, a red rocket lifting through a canopy of maple leaves. I rested my hand on the page. "You've got your own sky now," I whispered. An email pinged after midnight, from Harlan, 5 words. I read it. "Maybe you're not wrong. No apology, no warmth. Just a dent in the armor where certainty used to live." Another notice came through Sable. The next morning, the bank had initiated a separate review tied to Zeph's transfers, a process triggered automatically by our short sale record. I hadn't called anyone. Sometimes systems do what people won't. By the end of the week, Lydia's account vanished from the platform for violating harassment rules. The noise faded. The house felt like itself again. I stood at the back door and watched sunlight catch on the new leaves. People say blood is everything. I've learned something else: boundaries are what make a family possible. When my son grows up, I want him to know that loving someone matters less than not losing yourself to prove it. The maple will take years to fill with color. That's fine. We're not in a hurry anymore. Every story like mine begins in silence, where love gets confused with debt and loyalty feels like a lifelong sentence. But when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't roar. It whispers steady and clear. You are allowed to protect yourself. If my journey has shown me anything, it's that freedom isn't found in revenge, it's found in boundaries. I didn't fight my family to win. I fought to breathe, to build a home where my son can grow without fear of owing love to anyone. Maybe you've been there too, questioning if walking away makes you heartless. It doesn't. It makes you whole. So if you've ever been told your pain is disrespect or your no makes you selfish, know this: you are not alone. Before you go, drop a simple "I hear you" in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. Let's remind each other that healing is not isolation, it's community. Thank you for listening. And if my story reached you, stay subscribed and keep standing for your truth.